Welcome to Eastridge Forest near Shrewsbury for the Volvic British Mountain Bike Federation National Championships. This is the most prestigious event in the British calendar and there are over 1,000 riders competing here. But the blue ribbon event is the cross country and the course here is extremely testing. Mark by Siegel will show us round.
The Eastridge course is a 7.5 mile loop ridden clockwise, with 4 main climbs, 3 of which will have the riders down to granny gears. The descents are also severe, particularly at Epic Cliff, so there will be few opportunities for the riders to recover round here.
So as the riders line up for a possible national championship jersey, as well as places in the team for the World Championships, let's meet the hopefuls.
David has taken the national title for the last 2 years and last week secured his 4th successive points series title. However, recently he's been off form, so could be vulnerable here.
After a year of poor health, Tim has returned to his winning ways. He has also had a string of top 3 finishes in the World Cup, and with a lot of climbing here, Tim will start as favourite.
Barry has had a win and a second in this year's British Series, as well as top 10 results in the World Cup. Like Tim, Barry's an excellent climber and won on this course last year.
Gary shot to fame in the sport when he was runner-up in the Nationals and 4th in the World Cup Series last year. He has recently joined David and Tim as a World Cup race winner.
Since his first National Points Series win in '93, Nick has become one of the most consistent racers on the circuit. With the win in last week's points race, he has the form to improve on last year's bronze medal.
John is one of the most accomplished British professionals and after 2 seasons of mountain biking has become an all-rounder. He's still looking for an off-road win and to improve on his 4th last year.
The winner of this title for the last 2 years, Caroline has placed herself head and shoulders above her competition in Britain. She is now also established as number 2 in the world.
Deb was runner-up last year and is having her most successful international season ever. Last week she took the points title after a 3-year gap and will hope to challenge Caroline.
With a top 3 result in all national races this year, Sian seems certain of a medal here. Like Deb, she has continually improved as the racing has got tougher, and those two would battle for silver.
So the men are first off on their 5-lap race. Though there's some early tussling for places, the riders will soon sort themselves out on the fire track climb. And it's Gary Ford who's first to take the lead. With a win in the World Cup race at Mammoth 3 weeks ago, Gary should be in top form. So David Baker, he won't be too eager to let Ford give him the slip on the single track. Ford is setting a really fierce early pace, and though Baker's still with him, they've already opened what looks like a 5 to 6 second gap over Julian Wynn in 3rd spot. Julian hasn't been mountain bike racing recently as he's been concentrating on the road, trying to gain a place in the Welsh team for the Commonwealth Games. And setting off a few minutes later for their 4-lap race are the women. Caroline is undoubtedly the favourite, and it'll be a matter of how long the rest can stay with her, as well as how many of the tail-end men she can pass. So it's no surprise to see her leading after the first steep climb, and that's Canadian Jill Smith trying to stay with Caroline, but it looks like she's being made to suffer for her efforts. As a Canadian, Jill can't take any of the medals and is doing this race for training, but I'm sure both Deb Morell and Sian Roberts won't be satisfied taking a podium place unless they beat Jill. Rejoining the men at the Epic Cliff, and Gary is still keeping up the tempo, though it looks like Tim has rejoined the leaders. You can see how steep this is by the way they're keeping their weight back off the saddle. And that's Nick Craig going through in 4th. He's 13 seconds off the pace, but he's an excellent descender, so he could close the gap. Julian Wynn is now down to 5th, and he's got John Clay on his wheel. John isn't going to take any chances down here. He's a road specialist, as is Martin Early, who's going through there. So they'll look to make time up on the flat and the climbs. And there's last year's junior champion, Matt Guy. He's often got into the thick of the action this season, but tends to fade in longer races. And this one, remember, is 2.5 hours. We're picking them up again as the leaders climb through Maddox Coppice. Baker's now doing a turn at the front and Craig has joined the group. Last year these 4, plus Barry Clark and Chris Young, formed a lead group for most of the race, and it's shaping up for another excellent competition today. They've increased their lead to 25 seconds over the chasers, but it looks like Clay's going it alone to try and close the gap.
Go on, keep it going. Well done.
He's now dropping Wynne, who's also been caught by Clark. I'd have expected Clark to be up with the leaders. He can't afford to let that group gain too much of an advantage. It could be also that Baker is taking a breather, which will allow his teammate Clark to get back in touch. But he'll have to be conscious of not allowing any of the breakaway members to jump away. And also, remember, trying to get on terms is still this man, John Clay. Baker's other teammates are also struggling. Martin Earlier, former stage winner in the Tour de France, is 8th and over a minute down, with Adrian Timmis, another Tour de France rider, a further 14 seconds back, and chased by a whole string of riders eager for success at this level: Matt Guy, Ian Cuthbertson, Dan Cook and James Norfolk. But Wynne looks like he's decided to stop chasing and settle down to his own rhythm. In fact, he's now more concerned by what's happening behind him. Clark is only a few seconds down.
Go on, Barry.
Heading to the drop-off and into the main arena at the end of the first lap, and that group is locked together. I'm sure this is just what the crowd wanted to see, but it means it'll take a gladiatorial effort from even the most experienced riders to get back in contention. And for the likes of Clark in 7th spot, that's really disappointing. He's so often dogged by bad luck, but today it seems to be his form that's deserting him. However, there's nothing wrong with Caroline's. She looks like she's away on her own and already passing the tail-enders in the men's race, and they started 3 minutes before her. Jill Smith is already 57 seconds down on Alexander, who is obviously going to give none of her rivals any chance. Once she's out of sight, they won't expect to see Alexander again, and so they probably won't chase as hard. Deb's going through in 3rd, and she needs really to try and get away from Sean, who's only 5 seconds down and usually gets faster towards the end of the race. And this is a perfect start for Alexander. She knows she's strong enough to go on her own, and now she doesn't have any competition nearby, so she's riding free of pressure and therefore less likely to make any errors. Now 2.5 minutes down and still on their way up to the highest point of the course, the battle for 5th is on between Angela Ward and Louise Robinson, who's in her first year of mountain bike racing. No doubt the success of Alexander has attracted more women into the sport, but without the background of road and cross racing that most of the men have, it'll take them a lot longer to achieve the level of the top women. And Sean Roberts has now moved past Deb Morell into 3rd position. Back with the men's race as they reach the summit of the 2nd major climb on lap 2. And now it's Gould that has the head of the race. He's trying to crack them on the climbs, and on this sort of course, he could certainly give them the slip. They won't be surprised by Gould's pace, but it's having its effect. Clay's now a minute adrift in 5th, and he's going to need to find something extra if he's going to bridge that gap. And Clark's moved ahead of Wynne, and there are no surprises in the top 6. Nearing the end of the lap now, and Gould's efforts seem to have paid off as he's got himself a gap. That's about 5 seconds on the other 3, and they're now stretched out as Baker leads the chase, and it looks like the medals will come from this group. Clay is nearly 2 minutes down.
Go on, John.
Alexander, meanwhile, is still comfortably away as she heads down the epic cliff. Her weakness has been her descending, but she's really worked on that and now rarely looks fazed by anything. Smith's much more cautious.
This is definitely a challenge.
As she says, this descent is a challenge, even for those riders used to the international circuit, where the courses are often severe. Smith was also being hampered by the tail-end men, whereas Roberts got a clear run, and she's an established downhiller. Roberts holding Smith to under a minute, but has also opened the gap on Morell, who is not looking as smooth as usual. And the men are re-entering the arena after a small loop at the start of the 3rd lap, and Baker's back in the lead. But Gould's disappeared. He had stretched his lead out to 14 seconds, but as he comes through now, he's obviously got problems because he's not pedalling, and you could see the disappointment on his face. And as Alexander heads down from the top near the end of her second lap, you can understand why she's happy to go it alone. The front four men are putting each other under constant pressure, and that's when things can go wrong. But if you're riding on your own, picking your own line so it's safer, and she's nearly 3 minutes clear, then that's the way to do it. Deb Morell, though, she's now 1 minute 40 behind Sean, and she may well have to look sharp, for Angela Ward has come back to within 2 minutes. Meanwhile, the top men are heading up Lord's Hill, and the group is definitely down to 3. Gould has pulled out. Apparently, his front mechanism had twisted, which had left him stuck in the middle chainring. No good for the granny ring climbs on this course. Even though it's just started to rain, the riders will be taking on water whenever possible, for it's very humid today. And that's Matt Guy now up to 4th. It appears that John Clare's punctured and damaged his spare tube, which has put him out of the race. So in his first senior year, Guy is looking at an excellent result. He won the hill climb title up this ascent 2 days ago, beating Barry Clark into second, and it looks as though he's getting the better of him again today. And another surprise, Ian Cuthbertson has moved up to 6th ahead of Martin Early. Martin seems to be tiring, which given his road pedigree shows just how tough this sport is. And completing the top 10 are Dan Cook, Ben Dale and James Norfolk, all of whom must be really pleased with their ride today. In fact, Cook is the only one you'd expect to be so well placed. The leaders are now heading down from the highest point at 350 metres, and Baker looks like he's started to inject more pace. He's moved ahead, and as he checks behind him, that gap is about 12 seconds to Craig. I don't know if the rain's having an effect, but these three have suddenly stretched out, and Ford doesn't look comfortable going through there. Alexandra crests the top of Lord's Hill, and looking at her, you'd never think she'd been racing for almost 1.5 hours. No wonder she has her eyes set on a medal at the forthcoming World Championships, and she thinks it could be gold. Stamina is now beginning to reflect here as Roberts has moved up to 2nd. She's so good at pacing herself and always ups her speed near the end. In fact, she's already opened up over a minute on Smith, and I can't see her losing that advantage. But this is a surprise. Angela Ward has moved to 4th. Morell is obviously short of power, and of course, if it stays like this, it'll be Ward for bronze. As Baker heads up the final climb of lap 4, he must be feeling confident of retaining his title as his lead has stretched to 50 seconds. And at the moment, Craig just doesn't seem to have an answer. Gary Ford has also retired with breathing problems, and this race has now become a real war of attrition. Not helped by the weather, the course, which had held up well, has now got a surface of slimy mud, and in places it's glacial, which will require extra vigilance by the competitors. However, Baker, the master, is not likely to make a mistake when he's leading, and having his nose in front will probably give him that extra boost. Although I feel sure the big crowd here would love to see Craig close the gap up, and then they would be treated to a sprint for the line. With Ford out, Guy is now lying in the bronze medal position, even though he's 6 minutes off the pace. But it looks like he's tightening up, and in fact, Norfolk and Cuthbertson have really closed up on him. They're only 18 seconds down, and Norfolk is riding away from Cuthbertson, which means he could be in for a real turn-up here. Clark is continuing his slide down the field as the Irishman Robin Seymour moves up to 6th. In fact, he's moved up 10 places since the end of the first lap. Those 5 are all within a minute, so the battle for bronze isn't over yet. At the front, though, Baker is now on his final lap, and the rain is having its effect on the crowd. They've all thinned out and headed for cover, but more importantly, all the tracks to the woods have become treacherous, as we can see following Baker now with the mud cam. At the start, he'd have pedalled all the way down here, but now he's having to work just to keep his line. The climbs have also become harder, with only the strong riders able to ride all the way. Craig passing a tail ender there. Baker's now dropped back into the main arena after the first loop, and as he tops this climb, he'll be able to see Craig, who is just entering the field. That gap is 1 minute 20, and Craig may well have to settle down to his own pace and resign himself to the silver. With the number of retirements so far, Craig won't want to add to the casualties on the last lap, but Baker will be happier when he's back in the woods and out of sight of Craig. We're now picking up Alexander at the far end of the course on her final lap, and she'll know that she could almost walk it from here and she would be sure of retaining her title. And credit due to the organisers who've timed the two races perfectly, the men now catching the women. That means the crowd should see both titles almost decided together. Roberts in second, he's nearly 4 minutes down on Alexander, but she's really pulled away from Smith, and the only person who'll be overtaking her before the finish is the second place man, Craig, and there he is. Back to Mudcam, and we're with Alexander as she powers along the final stretch of fire track before the finish arena. And it's that impressive power that has torn the women's field to shreds, with Smith third, nearly 10 minutes down and not enjoying the mud. Robin Seymour has continued his end of race rise, but he's actually in fourth as James Norfolk tore past him over a minute ago and looks like taking the bronze in his first year of competitive mountain biking, although he's a very accomplished cyclo-cross rider. And Cuthbertson going through there in fifth will also be delighted with this ride. So an on-form Alexander heads out of the woods for the final time, while her fiancé Clark, whose form has obviously deserted him today, shows his strength of character. His determination has kept him in sixth place for most of the race. He's moved back ahead of Guy, who is now 2 minutes 13 down and has obviously blown up, while the fourth woman, Angela Ward, is sure of her place since Deb Morell has retired. Though none of that will concern Alexander, who takes the title with an emphatic display of power riding. This her third title in a row. Following her is another triple champion, David Baker, who has found form just at the right time. And despite Craig's efforts over the last two laps, it's Baker that will take the title. And here is the rally professional, who comes into the finishing straight and punches the air with delight. After finishing second in the National Series last week, Roberts has taken silver here in what is one of her most consistent seasons to date, while Craig's silver will be added to the bronze he won last year. And here's Sian Roberts just wiping the mud from her eyes, and who says winning is everything? Caroline Alexander continues her dominance of the British scene, but just look at the gaps between the rest of the places. Baker, for his third consecutive title, takes gold. Nick Craig for silver. James Norfolk, a surprise, coming in for the bronze. So Angela joins Jill on the podium for third place. And David Baker in his usual top spot, and after we spoke to the winners.
Caroline, another first place in the National Championships.
Yep, 3 in a row. I'm very pleased.
Considering your form, though, it wasn't surprising, was it?
No, but you never know. You can't be too complacent. I could have had a bad day and somebody could have had an exceptional day. But I'm very pleased.
Was it quite a steady race for you?
Yeah, I knew Jill would be there at the start because she was last week, but she faded very quickly last week. And so instead of panicking, which I did a little bit last week, I just rode at my own pace, and very soon she faded.
I couldn't expect anything better than second, really, and I was roughly about 4 minutes behind Caroline, so the gap's getting down slowly, but yeah, I was happy with second. I felt quite strong all through the race, really.
You look very strong. You had quite a good start as well.
Yeah, for a change. Makes a change, doesn't it? Yeah, me starting quite fast. Yeah, I was going okay, really. I passed Deb on the last climb on the first lap, and then I passed Jill on the last climb on the second lap, and I just passed through the start-finish here on the beginning of the third lap.
Going into the event, there was like half a dozen riders who had the potential of winning, so it was very open, and eventually we whittled it down one by one, with Tim and Gary Ford having their problems, and it was just myself and Nick fighting it out, and I managed to get rid of him on with 2.5 laps to go.
Where did you get rid of him? On a climb?
Yeah, on one of the long drags. I sort of put the hammer down and the gap appeared and I kept going.
It's really tough. Got to hand it to David today. He always comes to form for the national, and he did it again. I did everything I could, and I tried to keep the gap quite close, knowing that if he made a mistake I'd be right onto him. It was muddy and slippy out there towards the end.
On the fourth lap you were quite near him, weren't you?
Yeah, I was going down the steep descent really well, and I thought I could close in on him. I was about 30 seconds at the top. I thought I could get onto him down here, and just as I did the descent fine, I got it down to about 10 seconds and then slipped. and I could hardly get up because I got cramp in my left leg, so I lost him then a bit. Seemed to put a minute into me straight away then.